Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back. So today we are going to have a frank discussion about yelling, what it means to yell, how we feel when we yell, how we try not to yell at our children. I think we all would agree we don't want to yell at our children. We want to yell yet less at our children. But the reality is that is easier said than done. And the majority of us will have times that we have yelled at our children. So let's talk about how we handle that, how we prevent it, how we recover from it, and all of the emotions that go with that.
Yeah, this is a much needed discussion.
I think so, Sylvia. I think it is. So let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Why don't we start today by talking about yelling in general, what it feels like, what the range of what we do is. Yelling is such a broad word. And
Yes.
I think that there is a spectrum of what yelling can mean to us, to our children, to our families.
Yeah.
And I think, the very first step is when I am disciplining my children about something and I'm kind of laying down the law, like this needs to be done. My children will sometimes say, "Why are you yelling at me?" And I don't think that I'm yelling.
Yeah, absolutely. This happens to me all the time where one of my children will say, "Why are you yelling at me?" And I will say, and I know I'm not angry. I'm not like upset. I am just raising my voice to get my point across to you. I think that is fully justified, right?
I agree with you. I don't consider those things yelling. That's not what we're talking about today, right?
Right. Yes, yelling, in my mind, yelling is different. It comes with that feeling of recognizing it was purely me wanting to vent my emotion onto you because I was angry in the moment and I reacted to you.
Yeah.
That's when I think of myself as having yelled.
Yeah, me too. I think for me, it is more about like my emotion has been spent. It's more, I feel emotionally drained. I have just vocalized in a way that after that interaction, my emotional battery is drained. I have regrets from what just happened, and I question the effectiveness of what just happened there, right?
Yeah. I want to make a couple of quick points. One is that I feel like this scenario where whatever my stress level hits a tipping point where I would yell at my child, it was much more common when my kids were young. There was something about that, those buttons constantly being pushed, that I feel like I was like more apt to once in a while react. And maybe it was their age, but maybe it was also the period of time it took to kind of train myself not to yell, because I definitely yell much less now.
My biggest memories of yelling at the kids was actually related to being in the car, where I'm driving, a minivan full of little children, and the noise level and the emotion is just so chaotic in the car. And you feel like, as a parent, I can't even focus on driving. And that is a time where, I yell in the car because it just really needs to calm down.
Okay. I have a really funny story about this. And
Do you?
I mean, I think there's an aspect in parenting where we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. But
Absolutely.
This actually involves my husband, which makes it even more funny because he's calmer than I am. He very rarely raises his voice, almost never yells. So he has the kids in the car, in our passenger van, and they're driving, running errands without me, which I'm sure was already kind of stressful.
That sounds stressful.
And one of my children in particular is throwing a tantrum.
Yeah.
Nobody even remembers what it was about, but is in the car, like throwing a tantrum. And they get to their next stop, which is a CVS. And Eric says, "Everybody wait in the car." And he pulls this one child out of the car, and they are on the sidewalk of CVS. And Eric has hit his point, right? And he is standing in front of this child and he is yelling, I need you to get it together because this is driving everybody in the car crazy and it's kind of dangerous. Like, you need to get it together. And as he's at the height of raising his voice and yelling at this child, the doors to the CVS open and Tim Duncan walks out.
Oh, from the Spurs.
From the Spurs. Even, probably the most famous person in San Antonio, certainly the most recognizable famous person because he's so tall. And what's really funny about that is, and Tim Duncan and Eric make eye contact and Eric's like, hi. And then my child is like, hi, and he just walks off.
Right.
But the crazy thing about that is because Tim Duncan walked out of the CVS right in front of them while Eric is yelling at my child, it has galvanized that in everyone's memory.
We have a legendary story in our household where I had all 4 kids in the car and they were quarreling over a sticker, right? One of my kids stuck the sticker on another one of my kids. And this child is just freaking out because the sticker is on his leg, his bare leg. Like almost, this is the point where I'm driving and I can't even focus. So of course I say to my oldest child, because this poor oldest child is always the obligate helper, right? The first line helper. I'm like, get that off of him, right? Like I can't even focus on driving. So my son rips the sticker off his younger brother's leg. And then this causes him to actually freak out even more, right? Because it hurts now. And then he is like screaming at the top of his lungs. And I remember pulling over on the side of the highway to try to get this under control again. And I am 100% sure, even though Tim Duncan was not involved in the story, that I yelled at my children at that point, right? So, I mean, in retrospect, it is funny, right? Like, we laugh at these stories because, they're legendary in our household. The day that mom lost it over the sticker, right? Like, or the day dad, we ran into Tim Duncan. And we do make light of these stories. Like, they are funny stories today. But I do want to recognize in the moment, parents feel emotional at that time, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've expended your emotional battery. You have maybe taken it a little bit too far emotionally, like your voice was raised. And then you feel drained and possibly guilty from having done it, right?
Yes. And it's such an emotional outburst. I remember as a young parent feeling frustrated that, 95, 98% of the time, I could hold it together and calmly discipline my children. But in that 2% where my stress bucket was over the top and it spilled out and I yelled, that's what they remember.
Yes. And I feel like this illustrates why parenting is so difficult and why parents often feel like they're failing.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that worries me about creating these very high standards, like with gentle parenting, which the name of it already is kind of setting you up for failure because we're not going to be gentle, quote unquote, all the time. Is that we need to acknowledge that we are human, right? We can't do any of these things perfectly. Our children can't respond perfectly. The situations are often way less than ideal, like driving on the highway. Like, this is, stressful to begin with. There are going to be times that we don't react in the best way that they think we should. Now that we have admitted that we both have yelled at our children, even as pediatricians, and acknowledged that this is something that we both wanted to work on, let's transition to practically, what did we do? Like, what did we change? How did we try to overcome this? Let's talk about that in the second half.
Great. Vivian, why don't you start us off in the second half about your advice for parents when they yell at their kids?
So here are all of my thoughts on yelling less at my children. Okay, first off, I have said this in the gentle parenting episode. I feel like any discipline method that you're using should really at the heart be about building relationship with your child, right? I am demonstrating to you that I love you so much that I can't keep you in this pattern of behavior. I want to help you get better at that. And nothing you do can change my love for you. So Similarly, at times when I yelled at my children, I feel like a very important piece in my parenting was that when everybody was calm, I would go back around to them and I would acknowledge my mistake. And I would say to them, I am sorry. I, in the moment, got angry and I yelled, and that was directed at you. And I shouldn't have done that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll even say, will you forgive me? And that demonstration of I'm willing to admit my mistakes, I'm not perfect, actually created a lot of great discussions and again reinforced this idea that any discipline was used to create relationship between my children and created an element of trust, right?
Yeah.
Of trust that they still knew that I had their best interests in mind, even though it wasn't executed correctly, right? So in the future, if it happened again, there was this trust that, okay, mom's just upset in the moment. She still loves us. That doesn't change. It's okay.
Right.
And so many times what would follow that would be my child saying, it's okay, mom. I know what I was doing was really frustrating and I shouldn't have been doing that. I'm sorry. So it actually led into this really meaningful discussion by my willingness to demonstrate to my child my ability to accept, hey, what I did was wrong. Will you forgive me? I do have 2 children that were adopted from foster care. So they're both coming from places of trauma. So it's a little bit different. And I have this really jarring moment in my parenting that gave me really good insight and perspective on this idea of, yelling at our children and how I may take for granted that can be traumatizing for a child, even when it's not verbally abusive. And the story is that I had all 6 children. My youngest were ages 3, 2, and 1. And my 2-year-old was still small enough that she could be in a crib. And I put her down for her nap. And when I got her up, she was completely naked, clothes, diaper, everything thrown on the floor, right? So I get her up from her nap and I say, oh, okay, that's kind of funny trick that you've learned. You need to keep your clothes on because it's going to be cold. This was February. It was the middle of the winter. And it never gets that cold here, but it can get below freezing sometimes. So, like 60s in the house, that's cold if you're sleeping naked, right? A couple days go by and Eric is out of town, which obviously fills my stress bucket a little bit higher. Right. I have achieved getting everybody in bed and I'm going back around to check on people. And I crack open her door and I see her in the crib and she is asleep, huddled in the corner of her crib, completely naked and shivering. Like she is obviously cold. Her eyes are closed, but she's obviously cold. And I am upset. And so I pull her out of the bed and I lay her on the floor, which kind of like jars her awake. And I get her pajamas off the floor and I look at her and I yell, you keep your clothes on. I'm mad. Like I already told you keep your clothes on. Like, why are you doing this? It's so cold. And she, as she's waking up, she looked back at me and I saw this response that I had never seen before. And it was genuine fear. And she had been in our home for maybe 3 months at that point. Oh. And she was afraid. And oh my gosh. I had yelled at my kids, it happens on occasion, but I had this like relationship with them. They knew we had this trust, these things that I've described, that they knew that if I yelled at them, I wasn't going to hurt them. And it didn't change my love for them, that this just happened once in a while. I would apologize, whatever. But she and I didn't have that yet. And she's coming from a place of trauma where she's triggered. And I felt terrible. Oh, I felt horrible about it. And I got her dressed. I turned her pajamas backwards so she couldn't get out of them. And I went to hold her and she said, no. And she pushed me away and I laid her in bed and I tried to pick her up again to hold her and she said no. And she just rolled over. Oh, and Vivian. It was that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I have hurt you. Like I've really hurt you. But I learned from that moment, wow, there are kids that are triggered in a different way. It's not always from trauma, but from whatever, where even that act that can be as innocent that we can laugh about of yelling at our kids that once in a while it happens can be damaging to them. And I need to be so incredibly cautious. And the end to that story is not that I never yelled at her again, but I was so much more cautious about it. And over time, as our relationship developed, when I did yell, there was no longer fear. She knew at that point I was not going to hurt her. If I apologized to her, she would come back into my arms and hug me. And she would just cry and say, I'm sorry, mommy. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. There was a much more healthy response. But it took time and we didn't have that on our side at the beginning, like I did with my other children.
Oh, Vivian, that story is really powerful. For me personally, there came a point when after I had my fourth child and she was a toddler, where I went through a process of setting a goal for myself to try to yell less.
I'm
Right.
very intrigued to hear what your analysis
Right.
revealed.
And a lot of this was in conjunction with my husband and partner, right? We kind of came up with a strategy moving forward. So, like, one of the first things that we did was try to understand the situation and the combination of what was going on that caused that emotional outlet yelling episode. We kind of narrowed it down to a couple of things. It's not universal,
You guys
but
are so analytical.
we are, right? So, for the kids, like sometimes when the kid is overly tired, they have a hard time keeping it together. The second thing with the children, when they're left alone and on their own too long, like there is a certain period of time where everyone can get along without supervision. But if left to their own devices, it kind of can turn into the Lord of the Flies. And then it was like too long. So trying to kind of recognize the kid triggers that make them start acting up
Yeah, yeah.
to avoid those triggers, to not let those situations happen. So if anyone knows me as a parent when my children were younger, I was a sleep Nazi, right?
This is true.
There were no late nights. My children went to sleep at 7:30.
Until what age?
I have to say until like 5th grade.
Oh my gosh,
Like
Sylvia.
it's a little bit embarrassing. And in 5th grade, they got to stay up until 8:30.
I love it.
If my main goal is to try to not yell at them a lot,
Yeah.
then sleep becomes a priority in our household, which
Yeah.
we tried very hard to stick to. And then the second one, left too long on their own. We kind of like, as a parent of multiple kids, you kind of develop this sixth sense as to when they are no longer really getting along anymore. And if we went to like a party, having a good time chatting with the other parents, or a play date, where the parents are chatting upstairs and the kids are in the basement playing, there was always that thought of, there is a time limit here. My children can play together nicely unsupervised for some time, but fully aware that there's a time limit to that. And once I sense that time limit is expiring, then we, thank everybody and excuse ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the second part on trying to reduce yelling was to kind of look at me as a parent. What were the situations where I felt like I was yelling? One of them is stress, feeling overwhelmed in a situation. That's probably the number one, two, and three for parents. And going through this, how to not yell as much, there was a thought of how to reduce that stress. What are the key points where I feel the most stressed? And number one was trying to get things done. Like if I had all the kids with me and I needed to get something done, that for me personally was too stressful, right? Like going to the grocery store, like trying to go grocery shopping with all the kids, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound stressful to those who aren't parents, but being in a grocery store, a crowded grocery store where you have to get something done with children was just too much. And identifying that as a potential stressor, like avoid the situations where you may yell at them, right?
Yeah. This is a good one.
So those were kind of the techniques that I used in my goals to try to yell less as a mom. Vivian, do you have any techniques that you guys implemented in attempts to yell less with your kids?
Okay, well, first of all, we are not nearly as disciplined as you are. And I know you've even experienced it firsthand, but there are many nights in my house where I'm thinking, okay, it's time for everybody to go to bed. And my husband will say, oh, but wait, I was going to watch a movie with them. And how do I say no to that? So, yes, my kids, especially on the weekends, end up staying up late. They always have. So that was not a hack that we used, but I have others. So I think largely what helped me the most to yell less with my kids was about setting my own expectations of what was going to happen. So, I unlike where you looked at the situation and was like, all right, how can I prevent this from happening? I took the other approach where I looked at the situation and said, okay, the situation is probably going to happen. What do I do to prevent myself from yelling in reaction? And one of the scenarios I think of is that I had one child where there was a good, years, like a couple of years, where I knew every day getting out the door for school, there was going to be a meltdown. Mm-hmm. And it was unpredictable. It was going to be related to the socks not feeling right. It was going to be related to not finding the shoes. It was going to be related to, this isn't what I said I wanted for breakfast. It was all different. And I came to appreciate it as, this child is going to have this pent up, whatever it is, frustration that they're going to have to let out. And it's going to happen every morning. And it's going to be completely out of my control and their control. And it doesn't matter how much I try to pre-prep to prevent this, it is going to happen anyway. Yeah. And so once I kind of figured out that pattern, it never bothered me anymore. I knew it was going to happen. I just ignored it as much as I could. And we got out the door and we went on. And I will say, this child loved school. So it was not a school refusal. It was more that just very classic. There's a transition. We're slightly rushed. We're on a schedule. Like I'm trying to wake up. Like it's going to be frustrating no matter what.
That's really good advice.
I think the other thing for me was I was more on the side of, okay, when I feel that I'm getting tempted to yell, what are my coping techniques?
Okay.
And I mentioned in another episode this idea of, I think the timeout is very effective as a means of like, hey, let me gather myself before I deal with you. And then I think another one was enlisting my husband. So I would be like, look, when I feel I'm escalating, I need to be like, tag, you're it. I'm walking away. So I think for me, it was more the flip of like, all right, I feel this temptation coming on. Now I'm going to, de-escalate myself.
Okay, so we've spent this episode discussing parents yelling at their children. Why don't we go through with some summary thoughts on this topic?
Yeah. I think there's two angles to look at yelling. You very much looked at it from, what is the scenario that's being created that leads up to the yelling and how do we prevent that? I very much looked at it from when I feel tempted to yell, what can I do to stop myself in that moment? And I feel like both of those angles are really good for reducing yelling. And then I think for both of us, we've acknowledged that we did yell at our kids. How do we recover from that and continue to build relationship with our kids? And also grant ourselves the grace that we're not perfect either.
Right. Yeah.
When you and I are talking about yelling, we also probably need to talk about what verbal abuse is. And, when I admit to there are times where I raise my voice yelling at my children, it would not be in a demeaning way. It would not be degrading or humiliating. I'm not using curse words. It's not threatening.
It is never recommended and never right to verbally abuse your child, right? The American Academy of Pediatrics clearly states this. I feel like for verbal abuse, we're talking about the words that you're using are insulting, shameful, and demeaning to your child. This is not what we're talking about today. I mean, that is a different phenomenon.
Yeah, that being said, this has been a really good, thought-provoking discussion on yelling at our kids and ways to yell less at our kids. And I look forward to more discussions on behavior and techniques and tricks we use to try to be better parents.
Right. So this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.